Good evening, everyone. This is Anthony here with some PSet5 hints and tips. I've taken some time to write up a problem statement that I hope addresses some of the common questions that have come up during the office hours and sections regarding PSet5. There are more moving parts than previous PSets. We're using Luigi, we're using Dask, we're reading and writing files in different file formats. We're using CSV and Parquet. We're using a few features of the Python programming language itself. You're going to implement several classes as descriptors, as well as using the callable object functionality. So in starting the PSet, the first thing I strongly recommend is reading through the entire problem statement from top to bottom, all the way through to the end, including the optional tasks. So in the problem statement, I've highlighted the three major steps that we're taking in this PSet. The first, we're going to download CSV data from an AWS S3 bucket. And to do that, you're going to extend a Luigi external task class. So you're going to make your own implementation of external class. And that's going to look on S3 for the presence of CSV files. It's going to download those files and write those to your local disk. In the second step for this PSet, we're going to clean some data. And what that means is we need to ensure that dates are properly formatted and interpreted as Python dates. We need to fill in some missing values. We need to drop rows where the user ID is missing or the review ID is corrupted or missing. And from this cleaning the data step, we're going to read in the CSV files that we downloaded in step 1. And we're going to output Parquet files after we've cleaned the data. In step 3, we're going to analyze the data, and we're going to do some analysis using star ratings and year. In this step, we're going to read the data from the Parquet files that we wrote to our local disk that is in a good known clean state, and we're going to write the output to more Parquet files on our local disk. So one of the questions that comes up on this PSet is, where is the entry point? Where does my execution begin? So using Luigi, the entry point is actually at the end of the pipeline. So that means we're going to call the later tasks in the pipeline, and those tasks will, if necessary, invoke the previous tasks that are defined. So here are some of the Python, Luigi, and Dask features that are going to be used in implementing this PSet. So we're using the Python programming language descriptors, which is a programming contract that's defined in the descriptor how-to guide. This is the official Python language documentation. So this descriptor guide gives you all of the information that you need to implement your descriptors. This project implements several descriptors. This is something that you should be very familiar with by the end of this PSet. Next is we're going to use Python language callable objects. Whoops, looks like I need to update that documentation. Sorry about that. I'll update that. So callable objects are objects that respond to function calls. Next, as part of the implementation, we're going to extend two Luigi classes in particular. We're going to extend task and external task. These things are clear as you go through the problem statement. And finally, we're going to use Dask data frames. And that documentation is actually quite good. So here's the data frame documentation. And you'll note that in the problem set instructions, we do not want to drop down to pandas level data frames. Dask data frames operate over pandas data frames, and we want to keep our implementation in the Dask data frame portion. We don't want to drop into pandas. So keep that in mind as you get down to the data frame analysis. Another thing that has come up in office hours and section is in maybe easing the development and debugging of some of the tasks in this project. So you're going to make significant changes to your CSCI-E-29 project. And in doing so, you will note that there are a number of steps that you need to perform. So you would have to, in your CSCI-E-29 project, implement the classes as instructed, commit those to your Git repository, push those to GitHub, and then in your PSet5 project, figure out how to update the CSCI-utils installed in your pipenv. Rather than doing that, it's sometimes easier to implement, for example, the requires and requirement classes in PSet5, in the PSet5 project. And as your debugger and tests prove that your code works, then you can move those to your CSCI-E-29 project and continue development once you're certain that those classes work. Something to keep in mind is that the hints and tips included in the instruction set are quite good, and the skeleton code is also pretty good. Going through those tips, you want to weigh the pros and cons of using different approaches. And also keep in mind that we're trying to make this assignment as understandable as possible. Often the implementation is doable in 10 lines or less. So don't stress out over difficult or seemingly difficult and long implementations. These these functions that we're implementing, like I said, you can often do these in 10 lines of code or less. As we're downloading data from S3, you want to make sure that your AWS credentials are available to your command line and PSet5 Python environment. Making these credentials available has been covered in the past, and you should be familiar with how to do that. Each step of the way, I very strongly recommend that you thoroughly test your Luigi tasks and prove to yourself that they work. This makes it much easier moving on to next steps. As you develop, you'll find that after you finish implementing task 1 and you're moving on to task 2, you want to call task 2 as your execution point of entry. Task 2 will then call the required task 1 if those output files do not exist, and if those files do exist, then task 2 can just run as is. There were a few questions about using Boto 3 to download data from AWS S3. This is not required directly in your main code. If you would like to, in your test code, use Boto 3, you can do that. Again, that is optional, and that depends on the approach you take to testing your code. So just again in a review, there are 3 main tasks that we're trying to complete with this PSet. We're going to download data from S3. We're going to read that data from the CSV file We're going to clean it, and we're going to output it to Parquet files on your local disk. And then we're going to analyze that data by reading in the cleaned data from Parquet files, performing our analysis, and writing the output to separate Parquet files. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch on Piazza or Canvas. And thank you for watching. Any feedback, please post that as well.